We are live. Hello, and welcome to Thoughts on Talks with myself, Malayna Dawn, and Reverend Michael McMorrow, author of Blue Collar Spirituality, Finding a God That Works, and also the spiritual director at the Center for Spiritual Living in Granada Hills, which is really our host of this show. Oh, look, I can add and take away bubbles, thought bubbles. Ah, there we go. This is on the fly, baby. So, your talk yesterday, which was October 18th, yeah? Yeah.
Yep.
Was Bridge Over Troubled Water. Is that a dog?
It was.
Oh, is he going to be sad through the whole
He better not be.
recording? Oh, well, I guess when you rescue dogs in your home, then sometimes they want to be rescued repeatedly.
Yeah.
So, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Why is that what CSL suggested as the talk title?
Yeah, kind of weird, huh?
Yeah, it seems kind of out of. Are the rest of them? The rest of the month wasn't song titles.
No, it was somebody got it in their head that forgiveness is a bridge, and so a bridge over troubled water. But I knew the story of Simon and Garfunkel.
Yeah, that was great.
That's always struck me as ironic that they finish this album and then they break up. So apparently they weren't writing the song to each other.
No, they were channeling it and then didn't apply the principles. Yeah. Well, have you ever watched Behind the Music on VH1?
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So often this magical combination of people and music happens, and then it's just not sustainable. And that seems to be. It seems to be like the way of life, the human condition. Is that?
Well, I think also usually by the time a group is discovered, the quote unquote new group, they have years and years in with each other.
Yeah.
But like I said yesterday, it was, well, this is everybody talking about it in hindsight, of course.
Right.
But Art Garfunkel wanted to be an actor.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just so odd to think that they couldn't work it out. But you have two guys who carry grudges or resentments or whatever, and neither one wants to move off of them at the same time.
Right.
Right. So
it's like
we can all relate to that. Like I was saying yesterday, we can all relate to that on some level. But my son Michael was in a band right after college, and they did the tour thing in a van. Sometimes sleep in a van. Nobody had any money, and they were doing. They were just doing bars like the size of O'Grady's across the street from the church.
Okay.
Yeah. Which, if any of you ever come looking for us, that's how you can find us. Just stagger over from O'Grady's.
Actually, I can't say that I have ever noticed it. Like, I hear about it, and oh yeah, that's supposed to be across, and that's where Mel used to go sing karaoke. Mel, who was part of our community there.
Yeah, Mel.
But I just, it doesn't. I can't picture O'Grady's in my head. Like, I just blank it.
Well, I could.
It's not there to me.
By the time I made it up that way, but that's kind of my kind of bar, like dark and dank, and but then with dartboards in the back and dancing, and
I was always afraid to enter some place like that. I don't like the dark and dank. And
there was a place near my this shop for this company I worked for up in Lancaster. There was a place called the Log Cabin, which was an actual log cabin.
That's cool.
And yeah, it was kind of a rough place. It was one of those out joints that was open at 6:30 in the morning,
Wow.
So that should give you a tip of the clientele. But the great thing about those places is they always have the best beer because it never gets stale.
Okay. Helpful
So you
tip.
heard it here on Thoughts on Talks. This is our first diversion.
Well, at least we're keeping it in the community around our center. They have different sources for comfort right across the street from each other.
We're closed now, but
yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So back to Bridge Over Troubled Water. It somehow morphed into the meta prayer. Like those are the highlights that I remember. The picture of the bridge and you saying the story that has been told isn't true.
Yeah. So I went from Bridge Over Troubled Water and then talking about the relationship between these two men. And also just kind of fun facts kind of thing. Like in England, they thought this village really did think this was the bridge over troubled water. And the bridge is really old. It's like from the 12th century. It's a medieval era bridge. And several structures in England. But
is that phrase a phrase from the Bible or someplace that would have been around before the song?
I couldn't tell you that, just that he had heard it in a Baptist church.
Okay.
So, and of course, Paul Simon was Jewish, so I don't know how he, I don't know the story behind that. But, being a creative guy and he just captured that line like creative people do. And created really a classic song and a touchstone to the times.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I used that song and the story behind it just to kind of move into, resentment, which is often a theme of mine anyway. Because even though we teach this thing that there's a power for good in the universe and you can use it, to use it the most effective way you can, you got to heal your stuff. So you got to clear the pipeline so that good stuff can get in and also get out. And if it's all clogged up with a bunch of resentful sludge,
ew.
Yeah, stinky old sludge. You got to clear that out first, or as you go, at least.
Yeah.
So then I just spoke to the different, mostly Jesus and Buddha, and because all the great spiritual teachers talk about, the need to practice forgiveness.
Yeah. And really, we only have control over ourselves and our responses. So the only healing we really can do and have any control over is within ourselves. Because we can reach out to, like Paul Simon and Garfunkel can reach out to each other and attempt it, but it has to be each of them individually and the collective of them as a duo finding that healing. And if it doesn't happen on all those sides, then it's just within ourselves, we're left with our own healing.
Well, we still need to do that work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that I took from you telling this story about this town that has this legend about the bridge, and they've connected it to this story and made it part of their identity, is I watched the Netflix Social Dilemma, or on Netflix, I watched The Social Dilemma, which is about how people hearing different stories have trouble coming together and finding common ground and working together. And so it just sort of echoed this idea that there are so many different ways to look at stories and interpret them. And as humans, we need them. We rely on stories to sort of order our world and our understanding of it. And yet there's still the possibility that what we are putting our faith in isn't true in a complete sense, that it's just a piece and a perspective, and that we need to be open to other perspectives and other experiences and other ways of approaching anything to connect with others. Because it's like sometimes I've marveled that any two of us can have conversations about anything at all, because we have so many filters from our own experience and so many ways of interpreting things that sometimes I have felt like I'm just here alone and there's all this data around me and I just have to do the best I can with it. And that can be kind of isolating sometimes until you find something that feels like a fuller sense of connection.
Well, and the neuroscientists also tell us that the filtering is done on a conscious level. I'm sorry, am I saying that right?
I don't know.
No, it's being done on an unconscious, that it's all going in at an unconscious level, and then at a microsecond of attention decides what to focus on, which is usually tied to a threat of some kind.
Right.
So
survival.
Right. So
our lizard brain.
We probably really don't have any idea how stressful our lives truly are, even in a modern era. So we may not be on the lookout for saber-toothed tigers, or, well, actually, it wasn't that long ago, and in our area, it would have been a cougar or even a bear, right? I mean, 150 years ago.
Yeah.
So, we don't have those kinds of threats, but we still have the stresses of modern day living, including now of isolation. I'm running into people more and more who have been isolated at home now for 4 or 5 months, right? And now we're, by all accounts, I don't know what's going to happen for our area, but certainly in the rest of the country, cases are on the rise. And then we have the uncertainty of what's going on with the election, and it doesn't seem like anybody's really working at trying to find a solution to anything right now. And then we're all left to kind of sort it all out.
I've found myself thinking about greed and going back to the social dilemma, how a tool that was created essentially to facilitate connection had been turned by commercialism and greed into something else. And so I thought, okay, if greed is at the root of it, how did people amass wealth way back in history? And I thought, gosh, I really should have read that book Sapiens that Reverend Mike's always talking about, because I thought back to when money was first created. It was to have a common thing of value that could be traded more easily than just an even exchange of goods or services. And then how did people amass wealth? Well, it was probably through war and, warring tribes taking over each other's
controlling resources.
Yeah.
Controlling resources.
So now we don't have
goods or land or,
Yes. So now we don't have hand-to-hand combat between tribes, and we don't have the physical sort of tribal warfare, but we do have it on a corporate level, that there are corporate takeovers and there are power struggles that are happening in politics and in business that affect everybody. And it's the same thing. It's trying to use all the resources of the internet, trying to use all the resources of working people, or, human resources, that kind of thing. And so I started questioning, is this just another manifestation of the human condition, of spiritual beings having a human experience in a material realm that's duality based? And what answers can we take from history to move us forward from this place that feels like it's happened before, where people are pulling apart and seem so oppositional?
Yeah.
So forgiveness, or finding that bridge.
If we can get back to acknowledging that if we come from a science-based approach, at least we can agree on facts. So we may still differ on the story. So you were talking about, we have a story about what's going on. And so I was listening to a podcast today, and they're talking about how we may be culturally, we may be, and as far as global culture, we're almost at, it'll be interesting to see what happens. So kind of started with Brexit and then followed into the Trump with this kind of a throw the bums out kind of thing. So, and then that actually, for the most part, is both in England and in America, they kind of had their way in many ways. And so now we have a referendum ahead of us to see where do we go from here. So if it is in fact a landslide where the people have actually spoken, then we'll see how skillful the leadership is, because we are going to have, boy, you talk about a bridge over troubled water, right? We are going to have to find ways to bridge that, because of the energetic in all of it. There's been so much discord, and discord within these two different stories. So it's going to be a big job, and certainly it appears that one side is really interested in having that conversation and how to create a tent where everyone is welcome, and how to figure out how to go forward from here. In a multicultural, ethnic way where everyone is respected, versus kind of I would say, almost a collective resentment that things aren't the way they used to be in 1960.
Or
Right?
it used to be anytime, you know?
Well, one is kind of based on, you know, it's not really true, right? So, I mean,
right.
there were, you know, in 1970, there were half as many of us. Right? I mean, even the Valley in 1970, you know, out beyond Fallbrook, that was still orange groves. There was nothing there yet.
Wow.
So this whole place is, you know, really, of course, it was developed after the war, but really took off in the 60s with the, you know, I mean, at one time, Panorama City was, you know, the draw. And they had an auto plant there in Van Nuys where the Home Depot is now. And they built Camaros there.
Oh, wow.
And the big thing to do in the early 70s was to cruise up and down Sepulveda Boulevard with your hopped up car. So it's a lot different now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I was even at the supermarket, and I was talking to the cashier and the person bagging my groceries, and I was telling a story about embarrassing things or things that you do after a shop closes that you wouldn't want the clients to see. And if somebody catches you, it's embarrassing. So I was telling a story about how my brother worked at a gift store and he was playing with the puppets when he thought nobody else was on the floor. And next thing he knew, his manager was like on the floor laughing because of this puppet show my brother was doing really by himself. And the kid said, the kid who was bagging said, gift store, what do you mean? What gift store? And I said, oh, well, I don't know if it's there anymore, but it was Oz on Sunset Boulevard across from, I think, the Whiskey. And I said, I don't know if they have stores like that anymore, but you could go into a store and shop for gifts for people and have fun at the same time. And he's like, yeah, no, I don't know about any place like that. And I thought, oh my gosh, the world has changed that much. And he said,
there is an Oz in Sherman Oaks.
Okay, it's still there?
I don't know if it's still is.
I don't either. Yeah. But he said, how long ago was that? And I was like, oh, wow. Now I'm having to do math. I said, oh, we are old people now. Yeah, we're old people. It was quite a long time ago. And I don't even want to do the math, but it was probably early 90s when that was, when this story took place. Which
like recent history.
It feels kind of recent. Yeah. So nostalgia for a time that, you know, has passed and the world is different.
Right. And so this affects our stories. So I think one of them is like this utopian thing where can't we all get along? Yeah. And the other one is like, we're never going to get along. Get what you can, screw everyone else.
Yeah.
So, and within these two extremes, right, we have to make something that works. Mm-hmm. So, you know, our teaching is, I think, uniquely positioned in that way, in that it has been trying to make sense of a scientific approach to things and religion, right? So there's I subscribe to the Great Courses, and I was watching a physicist was talking about philosophy and physics. And also, he started out talking about astrology and astronomy.
Okay.
And how they both grew out of the same root. Mm-hmm. Right? So astronomy was actually observing what's going on, and astrology was trying to use that as a strategy to figure out what's next.
Mm-hmm.
And so he used that as kind of the allegory or analogy to physics and philosophy, and how physics tried to disassociate itself from philosophy. And in fact, out of that came different viewpoints around spirituality, like deism versus theism.
Mm-hmm.
How both, one is about having a being, a supreme being, and the other a creator, if you will, and the other
Mm-hmm.
is that the creation, creation is, and then there's no more deity, just leaves it to work out whatever it's going to do.
Okay.
And so there's this thing going back and forth in academic and scholarly circles about, describing all that.
Mm-hmm.
And disassociating from philosophy and trying to just nail down the physics. And so his observation, of course, is now physicists are now starting to sound more like philosophers
Mm-hmm.
in their interpretation, because physics didn't have to deal with why, but rather defined how.
Right.
And but now, the conclusion he came to as he's winding through the centuries with all these different thinkers is that it really is about physics and philosophy going further, and
Right.
which is what a bridge over troubled water is. It's the and. It's not the either or.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
like that you even use the words that were used in the Social Dilemma movie, that the internet is both utopia and dystopia, that there is this ideal that it can be used for such good and connection, and you can see the real world effects of it, like the Arab Summer, where people, were able to get a message out and stand up for themselves. And they didn't say that. That's just what I thought of. And then you see this other, maybe darker use of the same tool. So it's the same thing with a scientific view of spirituality. Is it's the same energy that we're working with, the same one spirit, but it's how we use it. It's how we use faith or worry, how we interpret and use the tools that we have available.
Well, and just to tie into what the point you made earlier, and which stories are we going to use, and why do we have to have just one story?
Right.
So why can't we talk about Buddha
Mm-hmm.
and Jesus in the same breath, right?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, most Christians. Part of it is that, so the Buddha himself said that he was not God. All right, I mean, said that up front, very clear. No, I'm not that.
Mm-hmm.
And he also described another. Well, he didn't really describe another nature of reality by describing what it was, so much as describing what it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember right, don't quote me on it, but I think that was done through a series of discourses where people were asking questions, and somehow, I don't think any of this stuff got written down in real time. I think it was just like the Bible, like people were thinking about it years later and said, "Oh, we better write this down before we forget."
Mm-hmm.
And, but he was, because it is possible to be a Buddhist and be atheist. And that's
It's a philosophy, not a belief in a deity.
correct. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, there are Buddhists who see the Buddha as deity, and they have the various manifestations. Of course, all these things have happened over thousands of years of time. And it just, to me, when I look at it, I used to see it as right or wrong or good or bad. And now, to me, my take on it now is just human beings trying to make sense of the world from the consciousness of where they're at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're trying to interpret, what the heck is going on, right? And because we have a predilection as Homo sapiens to recognize patterns, we tend to connect dots, right? And so an atheist will say, well, that's just serendipitous, things that happen by chance, and the person of faith says, well, no, that's a sign of,
like see a causal connection. That's because of this.
Right. And exactly. It's an interpretation. But, what's also true is that, what we're looking for, we're looking with. So if we're looking to gather evidence to support a intelligent design, right? So particularly at a biological level, we see the vast diversity of creation. And we just can't imagine that, it just happened through happenstance, through natural selection. Because it just seems like,
the chances are so slim.
Well, right. Like, the way a synapse works, for instance, right? That's just all chance, right? Because we can't imagine.
Right.
So I don't know where I'm still pondering all that stuff. The thing that I go back to is just that it's all that there's an energy. So a scientific approach, right? The conservation of matter, conservation of energy, that the system doesn't lose energy, and it's just reformulated. And so I'm just, where I'm at is I just think for humans that manifests itself and we interpret it as love or lack of. Which brings us back then again to the forgiveness component. Now, isn't it interesting that in one of the faith systems that God took form so that he could be rejected and crucified, and killed by his creation, so that his creation could then be forgiven, right? For this assassination of itself.
It's like is it Ourobouros, which is the snake eating itself?
Well, it's just, I would have, it's not something I could have even thought about as a 24-year-old, but as a 64-year-old, it's just an interesting thing to consider, because the thing that I used to also think was a bunch of bullshit was this idea of self-forgiveness, right? Because, because when you look around in the world, what you see is self-obsession everywhere, right? Because people are so busy working out their stuff from their own self-interest, and some obsessively so, to where we can even see how self-obsessed they are, right? But now, so So for instance, in John, it says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, right, that we might live.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is so, right, that, all are forgiven through the death and resurrection of Jesus, then who really needs to be forgiven? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we need to forgive ourselves because we've already been forgiven. And yet a lot of the attention is spent on, trying to get this validation.
Even trying to get forgiveness from others, trying to get them to forgive us for something we did, when really it should be our job to
and
either
it sounds
forgive
like
ourselves or make it up to them.
it sounds like I'm judging all of that, but I'm really not. I'm really just kind of observing it as a curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
because it is something that I held to be true for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But now the logic doesn't hold up, because if I'm forgiven, right? Oh, but you have to have the right kind of forgiveness, or you have to have the right kind of accept. You know what? Well, that's not what it says.
Right. Well, and then if we're already forgiven and there's nothing to seek forgiveness for, then we are holding ourselves in our own prison.
Exactly.
Which is why we have to forgive ourselves.
And then we have the genius of Jesus, who says, "Judge not."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why? Because we're held bound by our own judgments.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So part of this whole recrimination thing and just being so judgmental of others is often about stuff that we ourselves do, or we're afraid that we do, or that we would do. We know we would do if we thought we could get away with it. Right? So there'd be no social cost, there'd be no legal cost.
Well, I've noticed something in my own work recently about the flip side of each thing. So for me, spiritual bypass has been something that I have to be really honest and look at myself, because I'll gloss over things and say, oh, it's all good, it's all happy, it's all God, without actually looking at the reality of the situation. And so I have also noticed that I get really mad at people who seem to be full of BS. But then I realize, oh crap, that's the same thing. to gloss over something is to BS, but it seems more positive. So while I'm getting so angry at people who seem to be lying or seem to be embellishing the facts, it's the flip side of what I'm doing myself to myself. So then it's like, okay, now I can let that wall down of having to push away things through spiritual bypass and see, like, okay, we're all just trying to deal with the same issue, the reality, and how to manage it. And so then that lets me forgive myself and have at least more space, more compassion for the people that I have accused of being full of it.
Right. Well, was it last week or the week before where we had this thing, Just Like Me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's where you end up at. And ironically, where you also end up is that you are also psychologically, you are much more whole. You're wholehearted and wholesome, and you express wholeness.
Yeah.
And that's, I think we're kind of minimizing the amount of effort and self-reflection that it takes to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been consciously trying to do this. Well, first by kind of beating myself up from, through my 30s to my mid 40s, and then trying to say, okay, so beating myself up is really not productive. So now, how do I sort the bullshit from the ice cream here? Because it's not all bad.
Right.
And, I'm not all, rainbows and unicorns.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm certainly also not a wretch.
Right.
So, and I think that we all get there. And some of us can just kind of work through that stuff quickly,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
But, and then others of us, we have to revisit it, because sometimes there's behaviors that are attached to these things
Right.
that have been effective
Yes.
coping behaviors for a while. So the genius
Absolutely.
of the, I don't think that Jesus is actually given enough credit for being a kind of a genius, really. And just kind of stripping things down. And I think we lose it in the deification of the working man that he was.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that he did not have, an elevated consciousness and that he wasn't an ascended being. I'm not saying that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we need to let him express as just regular old life.
Yeah, there's that and you were talking about, that bridge, that he was both a working man and a mystical genius who kind of saw through stuff. And in the stories we tell, we kind of muddy the waters because people like to complicate things or like to, they have their own agenda of what they're trying to tell. So,
well, and would sometimes hit his own thumb with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're not going to do trade work without having that kind of stuff going on too. So anyway, so again, one of the, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? 7? And I can almost hear him laughing. Yeah, try 70 times 7, Pete.
Yeah.
Because it's so true, right? Some of the things that are really juicy and that were really, what the Buddha would call an attachment, they take a lot of effort to release.
Yeah.
And when we do, then who is set free? Right?
We are.
My brother's out there dancing away. He doesn't even know anything's going on. And I'm sitting over there. Right? It's like Holmes talks about the prodigal son, right? So the prodigal son gets his inheritance and goes out off to the far country, blows it all, right? And then of course he has a new thought. He goes, oh, instead of laying here with the hogs in the pigsty, my dad doesn't even treat his servants this way. Maybe he'll just give me a job. And so Holmes asked the question, well, what about the other brother? Right? And Jesus talks about that, right? So because the brother speaks up. What the hell, man? I've been here busting my hump, and now you're putting the ring on his finger and giving him your best robe. What the hell kind of bullshit operation is this? Yeah. But and the story, of course, goes for the prodigal son that he came to himself. I love that line.
Yeah.
He came to himself. And so I think, the first doctor of spiritual psychology, Jesus kind of calls out that whole thing. And of course, we kind of overthink it a bit. Or maybe we're just so focused on saving our ass from eternal damnation, right? That it's like we're stepping over dollars to pick up a dime kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
I know
I didn't mean to get off on all of that, but since Jesus got a lot of, and I also like the images that I had in there of the high jumpers, right?
Yes, the series of high jumpers.
Yeah, so
I said the series of high jumpers, and my Siri just woke up and was like, "How can I help you?" Simmer down, Siri.
But yeah, so I mean, these guys, between the Buddha and Jesus, they're raising the bar really high. Remember the Buddhist story of the businessman who came in pissed off because all his kids want to do is hang out with the Buddha and sit on their ass all day and not work. He comes in pissed off and pisses and spits on them.
Yeah, that's pretty hardcore.
And then he's thinking it over that night and go, wow, that wasn't cool. It's kind of embarrassing. But the Buddha's answer was awesome, right? Oh, that guy's not before me today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not that, the guy who you spat on, that was yesterday. Here's the guy today. Like, wow. You can live like that? I mean, you talk about freedom.
Mm-hmm. It kind of reminds me suddenly of that movie, 50 First Dates. Have you seen that movie? Where Drew Barrymore has a form of a brain injury where she forgets everything when she goes to sleep. So she'll forget like the last 10 years of her life, everything that happened since the brain injury. So she'll go on a date and she'll have this wonderful date and fall in love with this guy, and then in the morning not recognize him. And so every day he has to find a way to make her fall in love with him again, to continue to have a relationship with her. So she has forgotten. She's not holding on to a story, but he is, like the rest of us do, hold on to the story of who we are and what it means and all of that. And so he has to devise a way to like fill her in on why he's there and who they are to each other every morning so that they can build on that to have another day. But I was just thinking of it in terms of, well, we have our stories, and some of them are central to our identity, and some of them can be jettisoned. Some of them aren't good for us.
Yeah.
And so what story are we hanging on to? And, where does it take us? And I've been having conversations lately. A friend shared that she felt like she had lost her faith. And so I was examining sort of on my own the times that I felt like that, and how at the point where I felt like I gave it all up and like, that's it, I don't believe anything. And then something in me will go, well, I believe in gravity. I believe and have faith that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. I can observe how nature works. And I'm kind of the same way. Nature has beautiful, wonderful things, and then sometimes seems very cruel and harsh. And that's life, and it works. And if I'm okay with it, then I can take the next step, and then I can build up to having a faith in something again, which eventually leads to something universal, and I'm back. But I have to sometimes go into the darkness of, that, whether you call it a flip side or the full circle, the darkness of nothing and full surrender.
I actually don't think that that's such a bad thing.
Mm-mm.
So long as, like, you have to make a commitment, in the lifetime of being a human being, you're going to run hot and cold about all kinds of things, including faith. And so the time to make a commitment to, okay, so if I ever find myself in that place, I make a commitment now that I will stick it out knowing that I'm going to get through to the other side. Which, married people do that every day.
Yeah.
Workers do that with their employers. Voters do it with their government, right? So we take action, trusting that it's going to be better tomorrow than it was today. And I think in our faith life, I actually think it's good for us to be willing to stay in the question and just to marinate in it for a while. And, unless we're going into a really dark place, like if we're suffering some cosmic abandonment issue, then, we might want to seek help, and not just spiritual help, but maybe even, psychologically, there might be something going on.
Right.
But, because I've had those times, and then what I know about it, it's kind of it's like the intellect leads me back, but then there's something that cracks me open at the heart level that, and I don't even know that some of them have been really kind of juicy, mushy, like, teary-deary things. But usually it has just been a wave of insight that has connection, joy, and a sense of that everything's going to be okay. And nothing will have changed, right? It's not like my bank account got suddenly bigger.
Right.
Well,
I kind of likened it to grief, that I've had experiences where I was just grieving. I was mourning, and there's nothing to be done except to walk through that. And it wasn't necessarily anything I did that lessened the pain. It just did after a while. I just had to keep keeping on.
Yeah, that's a much better way of looking at it, I think. Yeah. Because in a way, you are grieving. You're grieving the old self.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, gee, I remember, this wasn't my experience, but I can see how it would be true because I have had charismatic experiences, right? And you, oh, gee, to be full of that fire like I was when I had, this experience, right? Well, yeah, it would be nice. I mean, even Mother Teresa talked about that. Someone wrote her a letter about this, very important, inspirational experience that she had where she felt like she was one with the divine, and it was so uplifting and powerful and delicious, and she was on a cloud for months. And but I haven't been able to get back there. And it said that Teresa said, yeah, that happened for me at 16, and I haven't been able to get back there since. And she was elderly by that time. So, but we just, now she was tied to her religious work, vows and so forth. But, there's just because someone's a cleric doesn't mean they don't grow, They don't want to pitch the whole game some days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess as we wrap up this talk, as we come up on an hour, our work is to look for the bridges, the ands, the this and that, the yes and in our lives, to leave space, kind of like we were talking about on the last episode. Bill Burr, the comedian's talk about how just a little bit of information left space for him to see things differently and make sense of things in a way that he couldn't until he asked a question.
Right.
So to look for the things that give us that space to see things differently from a wider perspective, and go over the troubled water while acknowledging that there is troubled water. Find our way through and hopefully do so together.
Well, and, to cross that bridge, of course, it's one step at a time. Right. And as David White says, start with the first step, not the second step.
Yeah. How do you do that?
Start with the step closest to you, the one close in. So.
Yeah. All right. So there we have it. Another episode of Thoughts on Talks. And thanks for anybody who joined us on this little journey.
We actually had thoughts this time.
We had thoughts and we talked about the talk. Check us out. So if you didn't see the talk, you can go to the CSLGH YouTube channel. Of course, you can go to cslgh.org to find the YouTube channel. And you can leave comments and join us in the conversation below. And you can always
also put it on Facebook, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I got a good response yesterday, so I boosted it on Facebook. So it'll be,
very good
for a while. So
cool.
Anyway,
thanks and ta-ta.
Cut you off there.
That's okay. It's all good. Toodaloo.
Toodaloo.